Sage Wanderer here, and welcome to the end of the world as we know it. And I feel fine. Well, not really, kind of. I personally feel fine, but nothing about this is okay. So we're going to talking about the events occurring currently in the world that could lead us to the end of the world as we know it. This is my World War III video for this week, and I guess I'll start by discussing the leader of the Hezbollah movement in Lebanon and his speech today, which I did watch all 1.5 hours of it. You're welcome. I watch it so you don't have to. It did present in so many ways very much like a State of the Union address maybe in the United States, but for Hezbollah and all of the Lebanese resistance fighters and their supporters in Lebanon. And I wish I could report to you that it was an hour and a half of the ramblings of a madman, but unfortunately I found him to be intelligent, articulate, charismatic, and persuasive, which makes him dangerous, right? I guess that's why they fear me. I contain some of those attributes myself. So let's talk about what he said. You know, the main thing people were concerned about was this going to be an announcement by Hezbollah that they were engaging in an all-out holy war against Israel. And I believe that the message fell short of the expectations in that regard. That he more or less talked about how effective what they have been doing since October 8th, claiming that Hezbollah entered the war on October 8th in defense of Gaza. And he talked about the strategy employed there, what they've done, and how effective it has been. And all of that I find to be very true. The limited and, in some cases, anemic attacks coming from Lebanon at the hands of Hezbollah into northern Israel served a tactical purpose for them. It was not for the purpose of trying to kill as many Israelis as they could, but more it was about tying up Israeli forces. He claimed that somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of all of the Israeli assets are being diverted to the north to deal with their threat from Lebanon. And that by doing that, by tying them up, they were doing a great service to the people of Gaza by cutting in half nearly the assets that were being allocated for the offensive in Gaza. He talked about how when this first happened, they immediately started pulling their troops from the Lebanese border and moving it south towards Gaza, and they had to turn around and bring them back after Hezbollah began lobbing missiles from the north. You know, this supreme leader of Hezbollah, who looks very much dressed in the same exact garb as the leader of Iran, you know, he blamed the United States for being basically involved in a proxy war against the people of Gaza and all the people of the Islamic resistance, claiming that this is all of this destruction in Gaza has been made possible by the United States. He more or less shamed us for involving ourselves in the killing of innocent women and children in Gaza through the attacks on these supposed Hamas outposts, which are really immense and very densely populated apartment buildings that have resulted in, if you trust the numbers coming out of Gaza, we're talking 8,000, mostly civilians, close to 4,000 of them being children. And, you know, this Hezbollah leader called upon all noble men of the world to look into their own hearts and see what is right and what is wrong. And he laid out 2 specific goals for Hezbollah. Goal number 1 is to stop the bombing and the aggression by the Israelis in Gaza, an end to the war in Gaza, and a total triumph of the Hamas. I don't know how you could be calling for an end of the war in Gaza and at the same time your second goal being the victory of Hamas in Gaza. That you won't have a victory unless there's a war. And the Israelis aren't going to stop because Hamas is their target, even though they are showing no concern whatsoever for innocent children in Gaza. What else did this guy talk about? He praised the people who invaded Israel as righteous, holy warriors, as he called them glorious fighters and defenders of their country. And he also rejected the idea that they had killed civilians that day when they entered Israel on October 7th, claiming that all of the innocent people killed in Israel were the result of Israelis trying to kill the Hamas fighters and killing their own people. Now, on the face of it, that appears to be a complete bald-faced lie. However, I would like to offer you one story, in fact, that I know has been vetted, is true, and did happen. That either, I believe it was on the 7th or the 8th of October, when the Israeli Defense Forces moved into these kibbutzes to fight and eradicate the Hamas infiltrators, that in one instance they came across a house occupied by 5 Hamas fighters, and they were holding 20 Israeli hostages. And instead of assaulting that and fighting those 5 guys face to face, which is what SWAT in the United States would do, it's what the Marine Corps would do, it's what the Navy SEALs would do, instead of that, the IDF lobbed a tank round directly into this building, killing all 5 of the terrorists and 18 of the 20 Israeli hostages as well. This kind of thing isn't being reported, but I promise you that happened, and we might not even be aware of it if it wasn't for the 2 Israeli hostages who survived the encounter. So there is a grain of truth that there are some of these Hamas incidences that the people were actually killed by Israeli ordnance, not necessarily by the Hamas fighters, although there is plenty of video evidence produced by the Hamas infiltrators themselves showing their atrocities that they committed. So where do we stand after this speech by this Hezbollah leader? Well, point number 1 is he basically called for a status quo or a continuation of the current conflagration and not an escalation. So he wasn't calling for all-out war, and he laid a couple of red lines in the sand. He basically said that what they're doing in the north is tying up Israeli forces and Israeli assets in defending the northern border, which is their way of helping the people of Gaza by reducing the number of troops available for the push and the encirclement of Gaza. And in a moment, I'll get into what's actually happening in Gaza over the last few days. But that was the first point, was that they have been in this war since October 8th. They don't have any reason to escalate beyond what they're already doing, and they won't escalate beyond what they're already doing unless the United States gets involved in bombardment of Lebanon from the aircraft carriers in the Gulf. Then he said the Hezbollah, without saying specifically and actually even saying he was being intentionally vague in this response, but he said, we have solutions for your fleet, that your fleet won't be an issue in this fight. If you bring your airplanes or your naval guns against the fighters, the Hezbollah fighters in Lebanon, then they would engage in a direct attack against our forces, both our naval forces, our air forces, and our personnel, and our interests in the region. He also praised the Iraqi resistance, who now has pledged their support and has moved fighters into the region to bring this more pressure against Israel from the other fronts. He praised the Yemeni Houthi fighters for firing the missiles against Israel, and it was, for the most part, a nothing burger to a great deal. It was more of the same kind of talk, proclaiming that those who have died, both innocent civilians and the aggressive Hamas fighters that would be guaranteed their place in paradise, and all of that crazy religious stuff as well. Now, as concerning the capabilities of the Hezbollah fighters in Lebanon, across the northern border from Israel in southern Lebanon, they just got a nice little boost in the arm coming from none other than Russia. Don't. That's right. Those of you who said Russia wouldn't get involved, well, they found an interesting way to get involved. Remember Wagner? Remember the Wagner group? They made news recently when there was a soft attempt at a coup against the Russians that they backed away from, and so it never really materialized. It was more of a empty threat of a revolution against Putin by this very powerful mercenary militia known as the Wagner group. Russia uses the Wagner group and has used the Wagner group in conflicts where they needed to do really dirty, nasty things, and they didn't want to deal with the accusations of war crimes coming from the international community. So they have this group that they paint as rogue, and they just kind of point them like an attack dog where they need them to go. So this group has agreed to transport a missile defense system from Iran, a Russian missile defense system that's currently in Iran, and transfer it to the Hezbollah fighters. Also, another group of 6,000 fighters that are another Hezbollah-related group in Syria also pledged their support and have moved to the border. And now the Hezbollah fighters in southern Lebanon are about to receive this missile defense system out of Russia. So, you know, if we're guessing how this leads to the end of the world as we know it, and ultimately probably a nuclear showdown of some sort, and for that to happen, Russia needs to weigh in. I have said in the past that Russia will not sit by and watch Iran get bombed by the United States without doing something. And they will get involved in these resistance fighters in Syria and the Hezbollah in Lebanon, and those fighting in the West Bank region as well. They will get involved by arming them and by smuggling in arms and both defensive and offensive weapons to these people to bolster their position and further encircle Israel with better armed and trained individuals. And they're going to use the Wagner group to do this. So the Wagner group from Russia is involved, and this indirectly involves and brings Russia into this fight. So those of you that thought Russia had their hands full in Ukraine and were going to sit this one out, well, yeah, you lost that bet. You definitely lost that bet. So what's been going on in Gaza since we spoke last? Well, the Israeli army has successfully encircled Gaza City. The first thing they did was cut the Gaza Strip down the middle, and closing the roads and creating a southern containment, dividing northern Gaza from southern Gaza. And it's right exactly on the line that was drawn in the pamphlets that they dropped on the citizens of Gaza City, telling them to move south below this line. Once this line was established, it appears that now Russia considers everyone north of that line as Hamas fighters. They've declared that all vehicles are Hamas vehicles. So we have video being smuggled out of northern Gaza, and it's at this point really only appearing in foreign press. America is blacking out this reality that people now that are still trying to get out of northern Gaza are being fired upon, and their cars and their filled with civilians and children and everything they could strap on their car. They're obviously refugees. They're heading away from the conflict zone to the south, just as they were told. But now, since they secured that line and split Gaza in half, anything north of that line is considered, any vehicle is considered Hamas vehicle. So they don't even try to identify, they just blow it all to smithereens. So you got video of cars full of refugees trying to flee the area being blown up by these by the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. And they've declared, essentially, whether they're saying it out loud or just through their actions, you're seeing that they're no longer having any consideration for anybody north of that line. They figure you had plenty of time to get out, so now you deserve what you get, and you're the enemy. So they're shooting at anything that moves, just like I predicted they would at the beginning of this conflict. That when a United States colonel and former advisor to the Secretary of Defense tells you that to be in this environment, the only way you survive is to shoot at everything that moves. And that's exactly what the Israelis are doing right now in northern Gaza. There is, from some estimations, still over 500,000 civilians who decided not to move to the south and risk dying, but would rather die in their own homes. And die in their own homes they may very well. And that's what it appears to be, a complete annihilation of not just Hamas, but everyone in northern Gaza that didn't leave is now considered Hamas. And this plays in bigger to what I've told you, that the true secret intention, the final solution for the Israelis and their Palestinian problem is secretly not such a well-kept secret, okay? They're not publicly proclaiming this, but when you start to intercept and listen to whistleblowers and people that are producing emails from the internal workings of Israel and their political structure, you find that they have decided to drive every Palestinian out of the Gaza Strip. And the army will say this: they said, we're destroying any building that Hamas might hide in, which means they're destroying every single building. Their intention is to create an uninhabitable situation in northern Gaza, that even if they pulled out, nobody would go back there because there's nothing left. Nothing. They're going to leave nothing and no one. And those that could have escaped are no longer given the opportunity to escape. And only international pressure will change this. They're going to start in the north with this in total encirclement. They cut the Gaza Strip in half. They flanked it coming from the north, the northeast, and they went down the beach road, and they've completely encircled now, and they're closing their ranks. And this circle around Gaza City will get smaller and smaller and smaller. And no food, no water, no medicine is going to be allowed in. They will allow those things into southern Gaza if we push hard enough. If humanitarians push hard enough, we can probably get that done. But none of that's making it north of that line where they've cut Gaza in half. And Gaza City is now surrounded. Gaza City is now surrounded, and everyone in it has been proclaimed Hamas by the Israelis, and no mercy will be shown unless we, the West, the civilized societies, can cause some international pressure to make them back down from their obvious plan to commit genocide and ethnic cleansing in all of northern Gaza. And I do believe their intention is to drive the remainder of them out through the Rafah Gate, out through the bottom gate into Egypt, and force them into the Sinai Desert against the will of the Egyptians. The Egyptians have been sending an increasingly alarming number of tank brigades from Egypt proper into the Sinai. There are forces from every nation now coming towards the nation of Israel. While Israel has the people of Gaza surrounded, the rest of the Arab world is quietly surrounding Israel. And all of this is going to potentially lead to the end of the world as we know it. So I predicted much of what's happening, if not all of what's happening. I do not believe that we will continue to let Hezbollah fighters put this same amount of pressure or any increased pressure with missile fire into Israel until the United States military gets involved in launching warplanes from our aircraft carrier in the Mediterranean against these Hezbollah targets. The leader of Hezbollah said if that happens, they will begin then to target American targets and see them as active participants in the war, and they will be targeted. Another line in the sand that the Hezbollah leader had during this speech is that if Israel crosses the line into Lebanon with ground troops, then that will cause all of the resistance fighters, and he named off a long list of them, Hezbollah being the largest, but the other ones as well being very formidable and experienced militia groups operating throughout the region, that all of this firepower will be brought against Israel and the United States if Lebanon is invaded in any way by ground, or if the Americans engage in flyover aerial assaults or bombardment from Navy ships onto Lebanese territory. So all this adds up to the powder keg. It wasn't the big, hey, we're going to come get you call for jihad that people expected from this Hezbollah leader, which in some ways is even more alarming because he's tactical, he's intelligent, he knows exactly what he's doing. He may have crazy ideas, but he's clearly shown a kind of leadership and understanding of the situation there that is disturbing to a viewer of politics and a person who comes from a military family who studies tactics and methods of war over their Cheerios in the morning. So that's the update for you. Tell me what you think in the comments section. Just a reminder, this channel receives zero money from YouTube, and you people are the ones that support this channel, keep this running. Please help me keep the lights on here in my cabin in the woods with a donation to PayPal or to Cash App. In the description is a link there. You can send things to my P.O. Box. I really love cash and gift cards at my P.O. Box. I want to thank all of you who do support the channel. I want to encourage you, if you're watching these World War III updates and you don't watch my sermons, consider switching over and watching my Christian sermons. I preach the love of Jesus. I preach the New Testament, and specifically the red letters, and we have an understanding of the law of love, and that's what's preached there. So if you hate church but love Jesus, pop on over to my other videos as well, and we'll see you next time. This is Sage Wanderer coming at you from my cabin down by the creek.